Hang on, Mr. Douglas. Yeah.
Welcome back, my power people. Yes. Thank you for joining me on this journey through some choice gems of Ingo Swann's Secrets of Power, Volume 1. Today, it's Chapter 16. The title of Chapter 16, On Having a Sense of Power. We've got 2 excerpts for us today, and this chapter is particularly great because it sets up the beginnings of the overview when discussing frames of mind, frames of reference, the way we engage with and look through perspectives into and interact with reality. Do I see a crowded walkway as a bunch of obstacles that I have to elbow my way through? Or do I see a crowded street as a chance to meander slowly, enjoy the environment, and maybe bump into a cutie or two? You know what I'm saying? Who knows what opportunities may arrive on a crowded sidewalk? But that's the idea, right? And this first excerpt discusses frames of reference having to do with our sense of power, where that sense of power may be coming from and where that frame of reference might be coming from, too. Let's get right into it. Here we go. The central difficulty needs to be openly and fairly pointed up. If individuals do have a sense of power, it is probably formulated within the contexts of their personal frames of reference. Those frames of reference not only formulate an individual's sense of power, but are also quite likely by that individual to be projected onto others in order to influence them. After all, the definition of power as power over others clearly and literally implies power over the power of others. The idea that power over others consists merely of having power over their bodies, minds, possessions, behavior, and activities is actually quite misleading. Indeed, if one achieves power over those factors, but not over the innate and potential powers of the same others, then power could change hands with some rapidity. Thus, the conventional dictionary definition of power as control, authority, and influence over others really does need to be amended so as to bring this hidden aspect into visibility. Power, control, authority, and influence over the powers of others, including their sense of power. But if one is to obtain power over the powers of others, including their sense of power, then logically one must also obtain power over their frames of reference. If societal and lesser formats of power structures are examined in enough detail, it becomes possible to discern that managers of those structures work overtime to provide and manipulate the frames of reference that others are required to adapt to. Thereafter, individuals do not really know if their frames of reference are actually their own in a self-creative sense. What they might think of as their personal frames of reference regarding power might have been imbibed and adapted from some external source, which will not tolerate too much self-creative and self-sustaining expressions of individual power. Okay, so Ingo is kind of building for us a frame to look at this idea of frames of reference. And he starts with saying, if you're going to have a sense of power, that sense of power is going to come from the frame of reference in which you are referencing the world and your experience in it, you know. Your frame will include the fact that, yes, you have some sense of power. And he does, just before this quote, go into brief definitions of the term sense. To become conscious of, to grasp or comprehend, or to grok, to detect automatically. It's that sense, like brrr, your spidey senses tingle because you got that sense of power. But right, so your frame of reference, if it does include your sense of power, it probably not only formulates your sense of power, but, and I thought this was very interesting, an insightful way to consider interacting with and convincing or coercing others, using that frame of reference with your sense of power and projecting it onto others in order to influence them. And he goes on to say, the definition that we are oh so familiar with of power is power over others, control, authority, and influence over others. But really, the term should be amended to being control, authority, and influence over the powers of others, including their sense of power. All to stair-step into the idea of the frame of reference. If someone or some system or operators within a system is attempting to obtain power over the powers of others, they're going to obtain power over your frame of reference. They're going to attempt to shape your frame of reference, which is where we get to the top of the stairs here that he was building us up to, saying that the managers of power that are attempting to have power over our powers are working overtime to shape those frames of reference in order to attempt to ensure that there are little, if any, self-sustaining expressions, ideas, motivations of individual power in your frame of reference. In other words, that sense of power that you may or may not have is being greatly influenced to tamp that down as much as possible. And in fact, the frames of reference in which we are operating from might not even be our own. Those, to me, are the two big takeaways. Your frame of reference is being manipulated pretty hard to minimize your sense of power and the sense that you can express it, and that the majority of the frames of reference that most may be perceiving through, there's a pretty strong argument saying that they're probably not even their own. They're probably not even their own. And a personal story, just for me, when I first graduated from college and I was trying to figure out my life, which I am still in the process of continuing to enjoy doing. What a roller coaster ride it is. But when I first graduated, I was watching a lot of TV in between auditions, one of which was How I Met Your Mother. And, dating a lot of different people, trying to figure out just life in general. What ended up happening is my mind kept going back to, how would they have handled this on How I Met Your Mother? How would the people on How I Met Your Mother, how would they deal with this particular situation? And I kept catching myself thinking, those people aren't real. Oh. Those people do not have any actual moral basis. That's a show built for jokes. Those are not aspirational archetypes in which I can look to for wisdom, advice, and direction in which to engage with the world. Those aren't good frames of references. Those are frames of references that did, however, get into my head, real quiet-like, to the point where it took me a little while to recognize consciously that my mind, when asking the questions, how should I move forward with these people, with these opportunities, my mind would automatically go to, how would How I Met Your Mother deal with this? And that was not healthy. It was not helping me. Just as a personal example of how there are a multitude of manipulators of people's frames of reference out there. And media, now more so than ever, I think, is working in overtime to do just that. As another side note, I did watch some short clips from a new Jim Brewer stand-up on Twitter. Very funny. And at one point he was talking about the news. And what I took away as pretty heartening was that he said, hey, does anybody ever watch the news anymore? And the audience did not respond in the positive. He said, nobody watches the news anymore. And everybody started clapping. This is good. Because he went on to say, the news is just there to lie to your face. March somebody out there, hello, we are here to lie to your face. And he said it was like a bad reality show. And it is. Attempting to try and bludgeon you into a certain frame of reference, which absolutely does not want you to be personally expressive of your innate inborn power. Ingo goes on throughout this chapter to dig into the discussion of individual empowerment, how it does involve discovering what to empower within the self, and what it takes to discover that. And a big part of that is discovering what frames of reference are to you and how you have got a set of frames of reference that are or are not majority your own. And he begins to discuss frames of reference, how you can look at it as a framework, which is like a skeletal framework, like a lattice made for admitting, enclosing, or supporting something. But then you also have this idea of a frame of reference that can be defined as a set or a system serving to orient or give particular meaning. And that's getting closer to a more active sense of a frame of reference, an orientation, a certain angular perspective. Then he goes on, there's one more definition of frame of reference, an arbitrary set of axes with reference to which the position or motion of something is described. In other words, a set trajectory, a set spin. Consider the Earth's trajectory in the solar system as the solar system spins about the galaxy. So a frame of reference can set your axis to spin and activate in a certain way. A way that may be generative or a way that may be destructive, a way that may be uplifting or a way that may be downgrading. And throughout chapter 16, he breaks it down, which gives the mind a lot to begin to build with. It's a lot of great raw material that you can then take and begin to mold and hammer out your own ideas, which inevitably are going to resonate far better than any How I Met Your Mother episode ever will. One of the major reasons why I find this information so important, because the act of generating or co-creating our own frames of reference will provide far more opportunity for our own innate expressions of power to come through, rather than from some factory-made, pre-formatted frame of reference that does not have our own individual best interests as primary built into it at all. Potentially very powerful stuff. All right, next excerpt is a bit shorter and hammers home the idea that the sense of powerlessness that one may have is not at the base of it one's own fault. I won't spoil any more. Let's take a listen. It is worth considering that if one feels powerless or does not have enough active power, then the fault is not with the individual as a life force, life energy being, but with the frames of reference that being is utilizing or has become stuck with. If one is seeking empowerment, it is also worth admitting that frames of reference can be very limiting, especially if based on some kind of illusion in the first place. It can easily be observed that most people will cling to their frames of reference through thick and thin, and perhaps do so even without having a complete understanding of what their frames of reference actually consist of. However, no one in the alive, living state can be powerless, at least in any complete or total sense. But all the evidence shows that they can be depowered, with the result that they can feel powerless. Depending on the circumstances in which individuals find themselves, depowerment can be partial or seemingly complete. But the feeling of powerlessness and the actuality of it are two different matters. And so you see, it may be because of that frame of reference being utilized, or that you may have become stuck with. And reaching back to last chapter's excerpt that I enjoy so much, no one in the alive living state can be powerless in actuality. But we can be depowered, which may mean we feel powerless. And so it is our responsibility to choose to shape our frames of reference ourselves and find that which best fits our situation as individuals, instead of taking the pink sludge frame of reference that is automatically attempted to be shoved down our throats. There are two quotes that come to mind in association with this idea that frames of reference are tantamount to expressions of individual power, and These spring to mind because Ingo references frames of reference even being based on some kind of illusion in the first place that can be very limiting. Those two quotes are, and I first came across this first one from the Assassin's Creed games. Nothing is true. Everything is permitted. And this one from Henry Ford. Whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. Frames of reference. Setting your mind frames. Whether based on illusions or not, because they can be based on anything, are either going to help you or hurt you. And this is why I like that last chapter's excerpt so much, because if you have a frame of reference that bases itself on the basic foundational fact that if you are alive, you have power. You have it. It's there already, and that power is a base level expression of myriad other factors of that power's expression itself. But starting there with, all right, I'm alive, I have power, it's expressing itself. It's there. It's coming out of me. How else can this power express itself? How else can I shape my mind, my frame of reference, so that more expression of that power, that is this life force expression already expressing itself, how much more can I shape that frame in order to get more expression out of me? That's why this book is so good, and Ingo's info is so potent, and why I am so thrilled to be here with you talking about it right now. If you want to get into it, I have been so fortunate as to be chosen to record both volumes of his Secrets of Power work, the first of which is available. There should be a link in the description. Find it on Audible, find it on my website, mrdouglas.com, MIST3RDOUGLAS, because there is magic in threes. And absolutely visit ingoswann.com, INGOSWANN.com, to get into Ingo and his history, his works, his experiences. We're living in wild times. Why not shape our frames of reference to optimize ourselves accordingly? Keep on shaping your frames of reference, and I look forward to the next one with you. Thanks for hanging, and more power to you.